Hey everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro, and I can't believe it, the year is flying by, but we're almost to Memorial Day weekend, and since that's the pretty much unofficial kickoff to summer, maybe you're planning a road trip or a little beach getaway, it is time to start curating that summer reading list. Pack the swimsuits, pack the sunscreen, and get some books in paperback. So we're going to help you out today, getting your brain into summer mode. Honestly, my brain is on vacation 24/7, so physically it doesn't matter where I am. Mentally, I think I'm elsewhere. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to take a look back at some of the amazing books we've profiled here on the podcast and the incredible authors we've had the opportunity to talk to. And I'm actually kind of pinching myself because it has been an entire year of these conversations, and I love to fangirl over these authors. So it's been a real treat, and it was very hard to kind of narrow down a list of who we wanted to revisit for you today. So, of course, we had to leave a lot of people out, and hope to redo this version of it again later on. But we've had a lot of really great authors who have made their time and their thoughts available to us throughout. So we appreciate their books and really appreciate the time. So this podcast launched May 17th, 2021. So I wanted to, since, it's new and still feels very new to me, I wanted to begin by taking a look back at 3 debut novels that were featured here in the podcast over the course of the year. All 3 of these made a very big splash in 2021 and now are all available in paperback. So if you have not gotten to them yet, because I know, you mark it on Goodreads like you want to read it and it's hard to get the time to get to everything, they're in paperback now, and maybe you want to take them with you or go the audio route if you're doing a road trip. So those are The Push, The Other Black Girl, and Falling. So 2 of those 3 writers come from careers in publishing, and it gives them some really unique insight into writing and obviously into creating a book that gets a lot of fire around it. So I thought that was an interesting thing to hear about. So we want to talk first, or remember our conversation with Zakiya Dalila Harris. She is the author of The Other Black Girl. It's a story of Nella, the editorial assistant at a publishing company, a really white world. She's very used to being the only black girl on the floor, the only black girl in the office. And it's something that she has, for better or worse, grown accustomed to until the other black girl is hired. Another black woman enters the department. Her name is Hazel. And things don't play out at all like Nella thinks they will. She doesn't get this sisterhood at all or any sort of sense of solidarity. She's put on edge. This book is a genre bender. It's an office thriller with some very interesting dynamics and really interesting looks at how we deal with race, especially in the workplace and also privately, regarding how it can frame friendships and a sense of competition. So it is headed to television, by the way. They're already doing an adaptation for it on Hulu. So Zakiya talked with us last summer about what it was like after she was done with the book, listening to the audio recording almost as somebody would that's new to the story, and how she's approaching diving in as a co-producer and co-writer for the screenplay.
I told myself after I did all the copy edits and went back to copy edits, like there are a lot of rounds of editing because there's a lot. There's just a lot in the book. I was like, I'm never gonna read this book again. I was like, I'm never gonna read this story again. And then the audio came, the finished audio, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just listen to a little bit. And then I listened to the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, because it feels so different from the book in a lot of ways, at least for me, because I haven't spent that much time with this story. It's been 2 years, a little more than 2 years since I started writing it, but it still feels fresh. And I just remember last summer, I got an email from my team at Simon & Schuster, the audio team, about people they were thinking for each of the characters. And to see all of those names, Asia Naomi King, oh my goodness, Bunny's Kermit. It's just, they're all so good, and they all bring something so unique and pure and thoughtful to the story. And I just am so honored that they took the time to do it, and they did it so well. And to have my words be acted out in that way is just so surreal. And It's just an amazing feeling.
Oh, it's incredible. And it almost, you hear that delivery, and then I would find myself going back and reading what I had just heard, and vice versa, because
Mm-hmm.
it was a really immersive experience. It was extremely enjoyable to be able to dig into the book
Thank
that way.
you.
Obviously, this will become a movie, right? Or
A TV
series,
show,
television series. Okay.
yeah, it's in the works. It's in the works.
Will you be very involved in that?
Yes, I'm actually co-writing right now the pilot with Rashida Jones. So
Oh,
it's
yes.
for Hulu. Yeah, it's been so much fun. It's definitely a new, just all new territory for me. I'm watching a lot of TV for homework, so like it could be worse, right? But I'm having a lot of fun just thinking about a little more of the story, a little more of the characters that we don't get to see in the book because you can only do so much in a book. But now it's like outfits and music and hair and conversations that we didn't get to put in the book. So I'm really excited.
So I'm really excited to see that as a television series. So again, Hulu. This book is out in paperback as well. There's also a playlist on Spotify that you told me about, and that was great. And in audio, it was fantastic too. So very excited for her, and definitely be watching that series. Okay, on to the next debut novelist who also came from publishing, Ashley Audrain, the author of The Push. She came from the marketing side of a big publishing company, and we talked about the pressures that come with debuting a book, and especially how many great books, she was able to see it from the business end, get all the support they need, a big marketing budget, but they still don't really connect or reach the audience like people had hoped or expected. So she says that was one of many fears that she had as a new novelist.
Publishing is a mystery. And I mean, I think it's even a mystery to the people that are closest to it and kind of, can see behind that curtain in a way. And I think that, I was always very aware of that. Once this book was, written and sold to publishers and was going to be out in the world, I was lucky that it had a lot of backing of marketing budgets and, sale was discussed at sales conferences and, had all of that build behind it, which I know firsthand is so important, for a book to succeed. But at the same time, having worked in publishing on the other side, like I have seen firsthand that does not always mean a book is going to resonate, and it doesn't always mean a book is going to work. And I remember, I worked at on the publicity side at Penguin Canada here in Toronto, where I live. And I remember, there were some books where we would put all of that energy behind, and then books would get into the hands of booksellers and readers, and they kind of just fell flat, or, they didn't resonate in ways that we kind of expected them to. And the reverse would also happen, where there would be books that would, not have the attention of everyone in house, and then they sort of miraculously kind of, bubble up and became the next bestsellers. And so I think what that experience taught me is that you cannot plan, to have a bestseller in a lot of it really is this remarkable mix of art and science, that makes a book work, and that publishing works on. And I think that's what fascinates me so much about publishing, and also why I loved working in publishing, was because there was this element of surprise along the way. And so all of that is to say that, even though I was lucky to have all of this kind of, energy behind the book, I always knew that it didn't really matter. That what really mattered was, like, does the book speak to people? Is it a book that is going to mean something to people? That's all it really comes down to, I think. And so while I was writing it, I was working in publishing for a few years before I left, and I had my first child, my son, and I was on maternity leave. And that is when I started to write the book. And I really felt like there was almost this like line drawn, where like that was before in, publishing, when I had that hat on, and I had really just completely switched gears, to this writing world, and to putting my writing hat on and immersing myself in that. And I think, of course, as you're writing, there is in the back of your mind the things that you've kind of learned through, being in publishing and reading lots of bestsellers and working with authors. But I really did try just to write the book I wanted to write. And there were times during that writing process of early drafts when I could feel myself sort of trying to make it more twisty, or trying to layer in more drama. When I was writing this book, it was at the height of Girl on a Train success, and this whole new genre of domestic thriller fiction was really on fire. And so it was, difficult not to sort of be pulled in the direction, because that's also kind of the stuff I was reading. But I did get some really helpful advice along the way. With someone who read my draft, who said, peel all of that other stuff away. Like, don't worry about that, and just write the story you want to write. Like, write the book that really is speaking to you. And so I really tried to do that. And that is what became the push. And so I think I had a better book in the end, because I tried to let all of that, trendy stuff go, I think, and just kind of, stay the course of the story I wanted to tell. So yeah, I think, there's no doubt that working in publishing helped along the way, in many different ways. I'm really grateful for that experience.
Ashley is so much fun to talk to, and I just love that Canadian accent. So she's already, of course, as all of these authors are, working on book number 2. They probably have it with the publisher already. And there is also a big money deal to bring The Push to screen, and that is supposed to be in a limited series as well. But I have not been able to nail down which network that will be. So we will stay tuned for that and see how involved she chooses to be in all of that. Okay, last but not least, in terms of our debut novelist, we've got to talk about T.J. Newman and Falling. She has a completely different backstory than the other two. No association to publishing, but a big love of books. She actually worked as a bookseller at a local bookstore here in Phoenix and Tempe. She grew up in Arizona, and she also comes from a family of flight attendants, and eventually decided that she would follow that career path while she pursued her desire to become a writer. She definitely was not an overnight sensation. Her story of getting to where she is now, Falling, by the way, also in paperback, is really inspiring. I want to congratulate you even more so than on the talent that's apparent in the pages of Falling, but on your tenacity. I mean, I read that 41 rejections before the right literary agent took you on and this book on. That's incredible.
Thank you.
There's a lot to be taken away from that, and a lot that you discovered about yourself, I imagine, through that.
Absolutely. I'm here. We're at the finish line, right? But it was a long, hard, uphill road to get here. I wrote over 30 drafts of this book. I queried, like you said, 41 agents who all said no before I got my one yes. And I felt every single one of those 41 rejections. It was writing in and of itself is sort of a isolated and lonely experience. I mean, you're literally alone in a room just writing. And after that whole experience of writing it, then trying to get it represented, because in the publishing industry, you have to have an agent. That's your way into the industry. It was a long, hard road, and I just refused to give up. I kept telling myself, you didn't come this far just to come this far. Mm-hmm. And so I just kept going until I got that one yes that I needed.
Wow. And it was the yes, because it puts you on a path to be working with the very best in the industry.
Yeah. And that's why the agent that I have now was my 42nd query, because he's a big fish. And so I thought, he'd be great. That'd be the perfect fit for this book. But there's not a chance. There's not a chance in the world that he would ever look at this. So that's, by the time you're at your 42nd rejection, you're really operating from a I've got nothing to lose position. So that's when I queried him, and somehow the rest is history.
And a little additional side note that you added to your pitch, is that right?
Yeah. When I sent my submission to him, I wrote a personal note, just scribbled on a piece of yellow legal pad, and I included it with the first 25 pages. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what the note said, because it was such a throwaway moment, I expected nothing from this submission. I just knew he wouldn't be interested, which is why I wrote this note that was oh yeah, this, and it was very confident and bold and great story. I can sell it. You won. Yeah. Nothing could be further from the truth of how I felt, and I remember laughing as I wrote it, because it felt so ridiculous. Because I was not confident. I was not sure this was a good thing. I've had so far 41 people tell me, no, this isn't a good thing. You should quit. You should give up. So the last thing I felt was this is a great book and you should want to represent it. But, maybe that had something to do with it. That sort of like, whatever, I'm just going for it and we'll see what happens mentality. But whatever it is, it caught his eye and he ended up saying yes.
It's so happy for her. It's so cool to hear about that journey. It kind of inspires everybody to go ahead and keep pursuing your dreams over and over again. It is a great story. She is such a nice person. Okay, from a debut novelist to a huge name in the publishing world. I mean, what does it really take to become super wildly successful? I mean, what's in that secret sauce that can keep somebody churning out bestseller after bestseller? We had to ask Colleen Hoover, right? Because her fan base of readers is just incredible. If you look at any list of bestsellers in paperback at any given time, she's got multiple books filling up the top 10. It is wild. And of course, she's a sensation on Book Talk. So I talked to Colleen earlier this year in January about the release of her latest novel, Reminders of Him, just in general about her success, but also about how her previous career frames her writing and the way that she's able to give back because of her success.
I used to be a social worker before I started writing books, and I worked for Child Protective Services, and it was kind of the same thing. We were just dealing with deep, heavy stuff all day, and you kind of have to go home and turn that off. And I think that's why my books kind of explore that side of tragedy, mostly because of what I did for the decade leading up to writing books.
That has got to have given you such incredible perspective for how layered people are. And that's, I think,
Right.
what your readers really love so much about these characters that you craft, because they are complicated, they are messy, and they feel so real.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I love writing. I love diving into character development. And to me, like I love the bad and the good in people. I love to study that. And I try to put it into my characters. I think it makes them more real when they're not making perfect decisions all the time and saying the perfect things. And, because none of us are perfect.
Having a past as a social worker, and also I know that you are very committed to philanthropy through what you do through your own organization. So can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be?
Yeah. So, being a social worker, I don't know if you know my whole background, but my husband and I struggled. We had 3 kids while I was in college. We lived in a single wide trailer when I was writing this book, not this book, but when I started writing my first book. And so I've just, I've been in the thick of it. And back then I was always wanting to give and to help because it was just the career that I was in. And so, you always have these dreams, like if I ever have the opportunity, man, I would do this or I would do this. And so several years into my career, I was talking with my sisters and we were like, why don't we? We have the ability now. Why don't we do something? So we created a charity called the Bookworm Box. And it's a subscription box. All the books are signed that go out. You get book swag, 1 or 2 books, depending on the one you pick. And every month that money goes to charity. And since we've started, we've opened a book signing called Book Bonanza. Like we have a lot of different branches from the Bookworm Box, but overall, I think we're at a little over $2 million that we've donated since 2015. So the book world is an amazing place. We were hoping that first week that it would take off and had no idea what it would turn into. Last year, Book Bonanza was able to donate to build a school in Malawi, and we're hoping to do that again this year. So it's just been incredible.
She is so incredible, and I can't imagine what it's like to be her and be seeing herself on the bestseller list. Like, oh yeah, I got 4 books on that top 10 still. I mean, it's really something else. Okay, I could not look back at this year's podcast without thinking about historical fiction, because that's one of my favorite genres. And when you're writing historical fiction, you not only need to be a phenomenal storyteller and finding unique moments in history in settings that inspire you and your readers, but you got to do a ton of research. So I wanted to share with you how that looks for 2 of my favorite writers. First up, Kristin Harmel, who was joining us to talk about Forest of Vanishing Stars, and how her research was really leading to a lot of private revelation. So that's very interesting. So first up, listen to Kristin talk about researching that book, which is also in paperback. And then you'll hear a lovely Brit, best known as JoJo Moyes, talking about The Giver of Stars and the time she spent in the South of the United States to get ready for that book.
At the beginning of writing this novel, I would have told you, if you had said how much of our past stories, how much of our ancestor stories do we carry forward? Do we have a responsibility for? Or how much of that is a piece of us? I think I would have said it's a small part of us, but maybe not the part that drives us. But I was midway through writing this book when I found out that my dad's side of the family, who I knew his side of the family was Jewish, but I had never known that his side of the family were Polish Jews from an area not far away from the area I was writing about in this novel. And I primarily write about World War II Paris. This book was a total departure for me. The storyline is very much in line with my other books, but the setting and kind of the events in the book are a little bit different. But I cannot tell you where the idea for this came from, why I was so drawn to writing about Eastern Poland. And it turns out that I basically, on the direct family tree, had a tie to that area and to those stories after all. That was something I didn't expect to discover. And it's something that reframed, I think, my own thinking about the stories that we carry with us. Because in a way, that must have been a story that somehow was a part of me, was in my blood. I mean, I honestly cannot explain why else this appealed to me so much to write about.
Wow, interesting. And I know that there's a lot of research in psychology about, generational trauma and kind of what's imprinted in our DNA and those stories and that history. So to kind of tap into that or observe that, how fascinating.
It really is. And fascinating that this came about while I was writing a story about what makes you who you are and what forms your identity. It was almost like, these things swirling together, trying to give me the right answers or something. One of the reasons that I think I wanted to move out of France for this book was that I had written several novels in World War II France, and I wanted to try something different. So moving to an area of the world I didn't know as well, and moving to a forest, which I'm not a super outdoorsy person. So having to learn survival skills and to learn truly how you would survive years in a forest was very outside my comfort level. And I think it's a really good thing to push yourself outside of your comfort zone every now and then, because I think that's how you grow. I think that's how you learn what you're capable of and learn what you can do. But in terms of research for this book, I always start off with just months of reading everything I can get my hands on, which includes survivor testimony, firsthand recollections of people who were in the forest, for example, in the case of this book.
So what a journey and what a thrill it must have been. What did you find when you went to Kentucky?
3 times. I went in different seasons because I felt like to write. I'm one of these writers. I have to experience the thing to really make the story come alive. I have huge respect for people who can do it off the back of a search engine, but I can't do that. I need to smell it. I need to hear the patterns. And also, it felt like a disrespectful thing to me to try and write about this particular part of Appalachia without experiencing it, without hearing the very particular tones of the language, because these people in this small part of your country have quite a kind of ornate way of speaking. It's beautiful, and they're great storytellers. And what I found was that once I got over there and listened to people tell stories, I suddenly could find that voice. And once you have the voice of a book, as I'm sure other writers have told you, then it flies. And some books are like pulling teeth. And this one, I couldn't stop. I was getting up at 5 to write. I would write through the night. I heard the women. I felt the environment. I loved Kentucky. I fell in love with one of the poorest parts of America in a way that I totally hadn't expected to. And it's given me a kind of bunch of lifelong friendships with the woman who I rented a cabin off in the middle of a holler in the middle of nowhere. I felt like it was a life-changing experience for me.
Wow. And there's so much for us to take away from that. I mean, here we are in the US, and, much of the country is often spoken in various phrases, flyover country or whatever. And you think of it as just a culturally, completely different space than what you would find on either coast. And so it's so intriguing to hear that it would leave such a positive impression on you and that there's so much to learn and see and know about the people.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. When I did the initial research, I was kind of anxious about going over there. This was a place that didn't have a kind of 3-star hotel within 120 kilometers. And I ended up at a bed and breakfast run by an amazing woman called Barbara Napier, who built half of these cabins in her holler herself. She has them kind of dotted around a 350-acre site, which is entirely untouched apart from the pathways between them. And the first night I went to stay there, I'd done too much research and I found out that this particular area was one of the opioid hotspots of America. And as you know, some of the less well-off counties have huge problems with legal drug use. And so I was thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? And actually, I think it was one of the safest places I have ever felt. I ended up living by myself in this cabin with no internet, no telephone, no TV, no communications, basically, except for what you could get at the main house if you walked up. And I have never felt more free. And once I got past the first night, because there wasn't even locks on the doors, they're just little pin hooks, because as Barbara said, well, who's going to come down here? It's 5 miles down a dirt track. And I grew up in an inner city. I just imagine, intruders, guns, bears, you name it. But within a couple of days, I'd relaxed into life there. And the people were great. The people were funny. And the language, just hearing, it's like the Irish, over here we have this saying, the Irish are born storytellers. I felt the same way about Kentuckians. I would go down for breakfast because everything was communal if you wanted to eat. And I'd still be there 2 hours later, listening to someone telling me about, taking a deer off a road or something. I don't know, but it was wonderful.
Oh, that is a much better probably experience for your writing than if it had worked out there. Like, well, where do the New York Times bestsellers sleep? You don't have a 4 seasons? I'll helicopter in. I mean, that wouldn't have given you the frame of reference you needed, right?
Yeah. Well, also you just, I rode horseback across those mountains, and it was, I learned things that you would never learn from the internet. So, for example, how quiet the forests are in the day, like how they're an explosion of noise at dawn, but then they go really quiet, and the sound a horse's hooves make, and how horses react to going through certain terrain. All those facts I needed to bring the book alive, what people would eat, all that kind of stuff. So I loved the research trips. They were as much a pleasure as they were, anything that I would consider real work.
I want to say thank you to all of the authors who have sat down and given their time to me over the course of the year, and I can't wait to be talking about more books coming up through the summer months and the fall. There's just so many things that I'm looking forward to, and many that I hope to be talking to again who are already publishing new books. But to wrap up, I just want to leave you with a little portion of what was our episode number 1 of this book club podcast. And fortunately enough, pinch me, I still kind of can't believe it, it was Kristin Hannah, of course, the queen of historical fiction, the person who makes everybody ugly cry, whether she wants to or not. I mean, for such a nice person, she really does pull the tears out of us, doesn't she? It's emotional growth, I guess. But she was talking to us in May of 2021, and it was just an incredible book. And The Nightingale, of course, anytime I think about it, I probably start crying. So we will finish this with a look back at Kristin Hannah and say a big thank you to Kristin, to the other authors, and to everybody who has listened over the course of the year. Hope you're finding some good paperbacks to throw in the trunk of the car or into that beach bag. Happy reading.
What I do is I spend a lot of time creating really deep, really three-dimensional, really emotional characters. And I think the readers fall in love with those characters. And then I put them through very hard times, because I believe that adversity reveals character. And I think there's things that we can all learn as readers by seeing how women triumph over difficult odds. And so, you know, I constantly say I am not going to make people cry in this book, and I try not to. And then they cry anyway.
Well, it's sort of like a human barometer. I mean, if I'm going to watch somebody read your books start to finish and there are no tears, I'm going to keep my distance, frankly, because we're talking about a sociopath, don't you think? Elsa was such a unique character that seemed like we knew her so early on, largely because of the strained and kind of painful dynamics of her family. So when you first conceived of Elsa and pictured her, how did she begin?
You know, Elsa is a funny story, actually. She is probably my favorite character that I've ever created. And, you know, when you're talking 24 books, that's a lot of characters. So I really fell in love with this woman. But interestingly enough, she was not in the genesis of this novel. It was not supposed to be about Elsa. And so I did, you know, a year's worth of research, and then I did a year writing the first draft, and there was no Elsa. And so I was at the very end of the first draft when she walked on, you know, she was a bit character who walked on to the piece. And I just knew instantly, and she had that same backstory that you're talking about. She had come from this difficult family and had low self-esteem and felt that she had very little worth. And there was just something about that really resonated with me, you know, because I always think how deeply we are affected by the things we hear about ourselves when we're young. And how those, you know, they're like burrs, they stick with you. And if you've been given, I think, an unfair or unreasonable sense of self early on, it takes real grit and determination to overcome that and discover that you are not what you were told that you were.
Wow, that just blows my mind, because we hear from authors oftentimes, especially if they're giving advice to somebody who maybe has an aspiration for writing a story down, and you say, write it, and it's a draft. And we look at you and we think, oh, you're probably writing a meticulously perfect draft one, and you're just pretending, wink, wink, draft two will be really different, but you know there's no draft two. But that's incredible that these characters almost live in your imagination, but sort of in an alternate universe, and kind of can come in and take over, and you realize they were always meant to be there.
Well, you know, and I think that's one of the things that is important, I think, for new writers to sort of understand is the writing of a novel is every bit as much a process as the reading of it. It's a journey of discovery. And, you know, one of the skills that we have to develop as writers is to, you know, when do we follow something that we hadn't planned on? And when do we ignore, you know, those voices? And I tend to listen to them and give them a chance and, you know, see how it goes. For example, in The Nightingale, the entire first draft, Vian didn't exist. It was only Isabel's story. Wow. And it wasn't until I finished the first draft that I realized that the story was too isolated. I needed to go bigger.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. Our editor is Nick Sanchez. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.